Hey, Scrappers, Tom from iScrap, and I am joined again by my dad, Tom. So, Dad, thank you for joining us. We wanted to talk about how the scrap business and how the scrap, industry works. And while I've been around it my whole life, you came into it, after working full time for a couple of years. But one of the things that I want to point out, and I have a friend, John Sacco, that talks about this in his podcasts, and he always talks about the for-profit recycling industry. And when you think about how many scrap yards there are, how many people and employees, what the scrap metal industry does, how it works, you need to start with some numbers. And if we could see some of the statistics pulled up, this is directly from ISRI from Earth Day 2021. And this talks about the scrap industry having over 159,000 jobs. And with the boom that we've seen in the last year, I'm sure that's probably well over 160. And it's cool to see some of the numbers like $116 billion in economic revenue, in the year before. And these were probably 2020 numbers. So that had to be close to $200 billion in 2021. But Dad, as you've been around the scrap industry and an avid reader of, articles about the metal industry, articles about how the lithium ion industry has come into play, how the metals have changed over the years, as someone who has experience refining gold, right? Going to the different smelter and seeing how precious metals are refined and then paid out. Over the years, what's been your opinion from the days of a scrapper all the way to a scrapyard owner, how the metal recycling industry works? How have you seen it progress over the years? And let's just kick off.
Well, when I originally started, the scrap metal industry was pretty much a domestic industry. There wasn't a lot of export initially.
Meaning most metals stayed inside of the country.
They were consumed domestically. You'd bring it down to the scrap yard. They'd have the big piles of steel. Everybody remembers them. They'd ship it up to the mills. They'd melt it. That was the end of it. We started getting buyers from Asia that were very aggressive, especially after the lower grade scrap products, the electric motors, dirty material that might be partly steel or aluminum.
Like sealed units and stuff like that.
Sealed units were a big item for them.
When the buyers from Asia came over, they were looking for materials like electric motors, sealed units. What other copper bearing or what other type of materials did you see that the overseas buyers were starting to look for in the 70s and 80s?
Any bimetallic low-grade material they were after. And it was funny because everything that we got went into the export boxes. Like a motorcycle would come in as scrap. We'd throw it into the export box because there was aluminum on it. If it was primarily steel, we would not have thrown it in there. It had to be bimetallic.
And what we've seen, and just bimetallic meaning two different types of metals combined, but not like a composition, not like a brass, which is an alloy. Just having a steel frame connected to an aluminum, engine, or something like that. And what we've seen over the years, as furnaces have developed, as these furnaces have gone from heavily reliant on oil and coal burning, they've gone to these arc and furnaces where it's electric, heat created, and a lot of them are going renewable, and a lot of them are going with solar and different things to power them. We've seen a cleaner grade of metal, and I think that the pressure from the third party or from the Alcoas of the world, I think that they've been able to put such pressure on the different mills that the mills have helped the scrap yards bring their grades up, bring their cleanliness up. And what type of processing or sorting did you see over the years that changed kind of from day one until retirement?
Well, a lot of the material was sorted by hand, especially the brasses. The coppers, when we finally understood how to sort them, were separated and sorted appropriately. I did not use a shear, as you know. So a lot of my material went out as a low grade.
And I think one of the changes that I've seen since I, took over back in the 2000s is talking to other people. And I've seen how equipment can make your life better, your work safer, and you can also produce a cleaner product. And nowadays, many scrap yards are doing things like chopping low grade wire that you mentioned used to go overseas to Asia, where they can put it through choppers and be able to get the plastics, the rubbers sorted differently from copper. You have new downstream flows from shredder yards where they're taking whole cars, shredding them into pieces the size of your fists. They then get put onto conveyor belts. And to your point, the hand sorting, it still gets done, but they've been able to use technology, pair it with magnets to pull the steel out, airflow to push plastic different ways. And they're probably at a level of sorting that you were used to, but on like a different, on the next level, if you will, because we were never shredding cars at Rockaway Recycling. We were never buying cars at Rockaway Recycling. So now you have these processors that are breaking materials down, and you had to have seen it over the years just from some of the people that you sold to, upgrading their materials, better shears, better furnaces on site. You must have seen that over the years as companies went from burning on site to just shipping outside because environmentally it wasn't efficient anymore.
Environmentally, the things that I saw when I first started in business were startling. They used to have sweat furnaces, and they would take an entire transmission and throw it into the furnace.
Wow.
It would melt down to a pig, but the fluids that were in it helped keep the furnace hot. So they would be putting them in nonstop, and then they would pull the steel out because it would be a good grade of steel coming out of the transmissions. But they would make pig after pig, but it was no afterburners. The toxic fumes were just floating away into the sky. That was stopped. That stopped probably in the late 70s, early 80s. They really clamped down on it.
Did that have a lot to do with the Superfund back in the 80s, 90s, where they went environmentally after a lot of pollutants?
Yes, it was. A lot of that was, I actually was involved having innocently sold mercury scrap to a person who did, in fact, create a Superfund site. And I was relinquished of any responsibility because I had sold in good faith. But all of a sudden, everybody was sharpened up to the fact that pollution could cause your business a big headache, and everybody cleaned it up.
And I think that kind of leads into the topic of how the scrap metal business works. I mean, I look at everything from a safety perspective, and we want to be able to work safe, because if we're not working safe, then we can't ship things efficiently. And then when we ship things efficiently, how are we shipping them? Who are we shipping them to? How are we holding the downstream vendors accountable? When I sell my batteries, I sell them directly into a battery smelter who has all of the proper paperwork. When I do electronic scrap as an R2 certified, recycler, things that you didn't have in the 80s or 90s, right? We now have downstream vendors where I need to be able to track where my material goes from my yard to the next guy to the guy after that. This way, if there's ever a problem environmentally, there's a longer paper trail. And these are probably things that didn't exist or started to exist while you were working. And you've probably seen develop through articles and things that you've read through the Wall Street Journal and other news, through the years, right?
They were starting to exist. I was actually subject to several of them because I dealt with some very large companies. The wire scrap was always a problem. A lot of the electronics also were a problem. And the companies that sold these things or gave these things to me for disposal wanted to know cradle to grave where they were going.
And that's been one of the things that I've seen with the industry, whether it's the electronics, whether it's the steel going to different arc mills, whether it's getting exported to Turkey, whether it's getting packed into overseas containers, loaded onto a ship, gone over to Asia or Turkey or India or any of these countries that are buying it. The kind of recycling loop that we've seen, I mean, everyone can pull that stat out. Aluminum can be back on the shelf 30 days after you finish it and recycle it. But you have all these other grades of scrap, from I-beams to bare bright wire, that they're being packaged in new and better ways. And a lot of things are still going, export. but more things are staying import because you're able to recycle them in a much more environmentally friendly and more efficient way nowadays. And you had to see that change happening over the years. And as you retired back in '07, you had to start to see the 10 years prior to that a big shift in the markets and how people were moving scrap.
A large shift. And quite actually, when I think back on when I first started, the toxins that were floating around, the polluting atmosphere, the smoke, it was it was almost beyond imagination because we all knew that this was bad for the environment.
Well, and you know what? It stinks that's how it was. I'm happy that things are changing. You know, while I have my different reservations about electric vehicles and how they're mining the lithium and things like that, we could go into a whole nother topic and conversation. You know, the scrap metal business, you know, if you're selling scrap to a yard, you know, once that yard gets the material and they separate it down, let's say the customer sorted it first, the scrap yard sorts it again, but the person that the scrapyard sells it to, they don't trust the scrapyard. They're going to sort it a third time. Then it's going to go to a mill. And if it's getting to the mill has to know with a 99.9% certainty there's not going to be any issues. And as scrap has changed over the years, grades have become cleaner, but also because things like wire choppers didn't exist, you've had grades get created that have had to, you know, get incorporated into the refining process. You're not just throwing heapfuls of bare bright wire. Now you could have a box of copper chop that's only this high that weighs 5,000 pounds, and that might melt better. So it has to be interesting that you've seen these things changing from an outsider perspective, still knowing the industry, but realizing how integral the metal recycling business is.
I agree with you completely, Tom. And when I look back on it and I figure all of the changes, you know, it would be wonderful to be starting my career over now. But it's also great to watch what you are doing and taking this tool and making it go to the next level.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at this. Look at this economic impact, and thank you. You know, $117 billion, 500,000 jobs from the metal industry between scrap and refiners, and this could be people that are making new product and selling it to, you know, Ford and General Motors. The amount of money: $34 billion in wages, $12 billion in taxes. I mean, these are not numbers to be laughed at because the scrap metal recycling industry, the for-profit industry, it produces so much economic volume on top of keeping things out of the landfills, on top of having things just thrown and mixed together, the lower grades that you're talking about, the pigs. We're seeing a cleaner scrap movement happening now that's leading to better profits, smarter customers, smarter consumers. You know, even big companies like Apple are talking about, oh, we're using recycled aluminum or recycled stainless. And you've probably seen that over the years, starting to see more companies touting that. And that all started.
When you consider that all the metals that are being used today, except for new production, have been recycled over the centuries from time immemorial. And it's just one more extension of that. Now it's refined, now it's clean, and now it's digitalized.
It has to be pretty cool to see how things have changed. And you know, the scrap recycling industry, you know, those arrows, they just keep spinning around. It might be a new thing that they're spinning around, but they certainly don't change like the arrows on your shirt.
I just wanted to add that at one point I remember going in and watching them doing paper pulp in a plant that was down on off of Route 80 in I think it was in Clifton, and I would see them take an entire truck and lift it up in the air and dump all the paper in. Paper never made money, but metals made money because they were heavy.
Yeah. And nowadays, more cardboard's recycled. There, especially with the online boom of, you know, online suppliers, Amazon, Walmart, using more cardboard boxes than anyone else in the world. You know, you need to make sure these things are constantly being reused. But that'll be a topic for another day. Dad, thank you for joining us again. We hope that people enjoyed these. If you're looking to be part of the show, email us at info@iscrapapp.com. I'd love to have you on to talk about your own scrap experiences, to ask us general questions. And until next time, scrappers, I'll scrap you later.
Thanks for checking out our scrap videos. By becoming a Patreon supporter today, you'll be entered into monthly giveaways for tools and other products to help you make more money with your scrap.